I don't sleep like I used to. My sleep process was the cleanest and most efficient part of my life for years. I'd close my eyes at 10 at night, and they wouldn't open until the alarm went off at 6:30 the next morning. I was never plagued by a restless bladder or night terrors. In fact, I don't even remember dreaming. It was clockwork. But things changed after I moved to Petra Mills. I always liked living just outside of Phoenix. It was just my speed, not an exhausting pace that left me feeling incapable of keeping up, and not so dull that I felt I wasn't living. But things in life change, and in this case, it was my home. Petra Mills was definitely more rural than I preferred. Eating out meant a rotation of the same 3 mom-and-pop shops in town. Roads were a little snug when driving too wide, and choosing where to stop for gas was always an easy choice, as there was only one station at the far west side. Good luck finding any of it on a map. The people were different than I was used to as well. The way they spoke was dull and a bit drawn out. Any inflection in their voices seemed to be saved for only the most exciting of moments. For the longest time, I thought they may have had a drinking problem that fueled this dissonance. And not just some, all of them. At least anyone who called themselves a true Petran. Most of their eyes were bloodshot. Bright red spidering veins cracked through their white glossy palates. Their eyes seemed to have difficulty pulling focus. During conversations, their eyes darted quickly, and their fluttering eyelids tried to catch up with what was happening. Their bottom eyelids tended to droop, as if time had used its microwave function to age each of them exponentially quicker. And the baggy skin was tinted a slight gray. Not so different than my college days when I stretched my time between drinking and homework, cutting out sleep to make room for the rest. And there is one more important thing to know about Petra Mills. The sand. It goes on forever. Bright reds and oranges, tie-dyeing the rocks that circled the town, placing Petra Mills in its own bowl. The sand has been personified in the town. The elementary school mascot is the Petra Mills Sandmen. A drive-through beverage castle is actually designed to look like a sand castle. And Bucky's Sandwich Shop has a large neon sign where the sand part in sandwich is bold and bulb-traced. It's an endearing characteristic, or a giant eye roll depending on how you look at it. Apparently the obsession began in the 1880s when it was founded as a mining town. After the valuable minerals had been extracted from the hills, all that was left was the sand. Local businesses looked for a way to stay alive despite their resources running dry. So they began selling their sand. First as a novelty item, beautiful red and orange mosaics in jars. Then they advertised it as a miracle mix, that a dash in your morning coffee would keep you from all sorts of ailments. But as science caught up to the elixir of lies, that proved to be an unsustainable way to turn a profit. But they found another way, by selling their sand to construction companies. The sand could be mixed into concrete or blown into glass. It could even be used with the casting of ironwork. Petra Mills had found a way to stay alive, at least temporarily. But by the time I moved to Petra Mills, even those methods had died. The town was dying. The mining facilities had been shut down decades ago, leaving only the massive metal skeletons of industry past peeking above the ever-changing dunes on Petra Mills' perimeter. My first few nights in Petra Mills were rough, to say the least. I attempted to keep the same sleep schedule that I was used to, but to no avail. I'd close my eyes for a moment, only to have them spring open seconds later. I chalked it up to the new environment. Maybe it was the subconscious stress of a new living situation keeping me from catching those Z's. Either way, I spent multiple nights flat on the bed, looking straight up at the blues and greens of Bucky's Sandwich Shop sign sliced up by my blinds and projected on the ceiling. I'd be lying if I told you that sleep deprivation wasn't having an effect on me. I began living in a fog. That feeling where noises and visuals meld together into confusing streams of color and painfully loud tones. I even bought a new bed hoping it would remedy this curse, but it was fruitless. And as I spent more nights fighting for rest, my fog evolved into mirages. Reality seemed bent, I was seeing things I knew weren't there. Like how I would see sand whipping in the wind only to assemble itself into living things. And I knew they couldn't be real. Thousands of rogue grains of sand don't transform from clouds into creatures. But even as my brain tried to reject what my weary eyes were seeing, there was no denying how terrifying the mirage creatures were. They were tall, maybe 12 feet, and towering over the cars and townspeople. Their 4 long and thin limbs reaching down from their frail suspended torsos as they prowled like lanky wolves through the streets. 2 large ears protruded from the heads next to thick spire-like horns angled back from their skulls and following their body lines. I remember that their mouths were stocked with dagger-like teeth, and behind them was a tongue that would stretch far out front of its body, probing the air in a snake-like motion. But one thing that really stood out about them: their eyes. I couldn't see them. They seemed to be swollen shut. And although they were only figments of my tired mind, not seeing their eyes was unnerving. As they say, eyes are the windows to the soul, but I had no window to see theirs. And almost as quickly as they appeared, the creatures were wafted away in a gust as if they never were there. Because they weren't, of course. Just a product of my lack of sleep and restless eyes. My apartment shared a wall with a longtime Petran. Born and raised here, she reminded me regularly. Estelle was a sweet older lady with a long-winded way of telling simple stories and a short-term memory for recalling that she had just told those stories. Her eyes drooped like a true Petran, and she always shuffled around her apartment in her slippers that were made to look like Tweety Bird's face. But as odd and colorful as she was the closest thing I had to company while in Petra Mills, even if it was because she loved initiating redundant conversation. But she did show a lot of interest in me and my job. She wanted to know why any company would want to pull out the machinery from the old mines. I explained to her over and over how expensive machinery was, how some could be refurbished and reused, how some could be sold for scrap, or how some could even find its way into museums. I told her that I was just there to find out what was left to be salvaged and figure out the worth of them. I, personally, wasn't taking anything. She was wowed by the process and called me brave for going down in those mines. I assured her that it wasn't that big of a deal, but she assured me that it was. She told me to be careful while I was around them, that this town started with those mines and that it's probably going to end with them. Looking back now, I wish I wouldn't have zoned out from this conversation. I chalked it up to Estelle just talking to hear herself talk. And because of that, my mind drifted off, and I caught myself just nodding and giving the occasional until she had talked herself out. In another conversation, I brought up that I was having trouble sleeping, and she responded by telling me that I wasn't alone. No one ever sleeps well in Petra Mills, she said. She did suggest melatonin to me, though, that taking these pills would trick my brain into sleep at least for a little bit. It had been years since I had taken melatonin, since my early career when I worked the night shift and needed its assistance to sleep during the day. But part of melatonin scared me. When I had used it before, I often found myself lost in deep dreams, situations that felt so real. When I woke up, I had difficulty deciphering what was reality from what was just in my sleep. But I listened to her and bought myself a bottle. I was desperate at this point. Unfortunately, my sleeping problems didn't get better, only worse. I was still getting a minimal amount of sleep, and on top of my sleep deprivation, I was now drugged. Although melatonin is naturally produced by the body to induce sleep, the pill still had a profound effect on me when my body was being told it was tired, but never being able to catch up with some shut-eye. My fog turned into mirages, and my mirages began turning into full-on hallucinations. I was hearing things through the walls, omnipotent voices coming to me like washed-out whispers, hearing words in the winds that whipped sand across my walls and windows. Stolen sands, feed to sleep. often words I couldn't fully make out. The phantom echoes haunted my distorted thoughts as I lay face up on my bed, staring at the same lights from Bucky's sandwich shop night after night. But there was more than sounds. I began experiencing things, terrifying hallucinations that didn't make sense. Sand seeping through every crevice in my room, under the door, between the floorboards, filling it like a pool, and I couldn't move as the sands drowned me. The next moment, in a swoosh of color, I was working, inspecting a large rusted piece of machinery, and the next I was at the store buying cans of beans and bottles of melatonin. Then my bed again. My life felt like it was passing in stitched together moments or days. I couldn't tell anymore. I hallucinated flashlights outside of my windows. They weren't looking into my room, though. They were calling out for my sweet old neighbor Estelle. They told her it was time, and I looked out my window to see all the townspeople. They were the ones with the flashlights. They stood out there motionless and asked for her to come out. She didn't. I remember hearing the clawing against the wall that I shared with her apartment. Estelle screamed and begged them not to, and I was pinned against the bed. But by what? A rogue case of sleep paralysis, maybe? Or were there hands on me, holding me down? I don't know. I suppose weeks of little sleep make you imagine the craziest things. The next moment, there was silence. No screaming, no clawing. Even the wind outside was calm. I could only hear the buzz of the neon sign next door, but I wasn't alone. I felt a presence in the room, something in the shadows. I wasn't ready to move, I just wanted to assess. And I was right. Forming from particulate and thin air, the sand creature accumulated just above my bed, towering yet quiet, stealthy, like the sound of sand sifting through your fingers. I was frozen with fear, sinking into my bed as deep as the mattress would allow me. But the creature inched closer still, its eyes swollen shut and blind. Opening its mouth, its tongue lurched out. It prodded the air like it was searching for something. And then it found what it was looking for. Me. The tongue snaked its way down and towards me. My heart raced as my eyes were wide and focused, until its tongue ran along each of them. And then, black. It was the first night I had slept well in weeks. I woke up refreshed, rubbing my eyes and feeling the sandy crust of a good night's sleep fall away. The terrible slideshow of hallucinations in real life had stopped. The sun now felt nice instead of headache-inducing, and coffee felt like a luxury instead of fuel. I went to work that day taking inventory of an elevator lift on one of the old mines across town. There was spray paint on much of the walls and equipment, vandals letting off some form of pent-up self-expression. There was trash aplenty, beer bottles and looted toolboxes with their tools thrown about. But there was one piece of trash that would expedite my departure from Petra Mills, a sort of canary in the coal mine, just short of an elevator shaft that descended 300 feet into pitch black, was a slipper. A single slipper with Tweety Bird's face on it. I didn't stay much longer in Petra Mills, but while I was there, my sleepless nights returned. I would never have another good night's rest aside from that one. I would never see my chatty neighbor again either, and honestly, I never asked about her. And even now, after leaving Petra Mills, I don't sleep like I used to. I feel vulnerable when I try to sleep. I feel haunted. Cursed, maybe. Estelle told me that Petra Mills was born from those mines and would probably die because of them. And maybe it should. That was I Don't Sleep Like I Used To by Reddit user OnshoreOtter. A link to the original story can be found in the description below. If you enjoyed this narration, please hit the like button, and perhaps the subscribe button if you're so inclined.